This is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
7:48 a.m. You're listening to The Morning Run with Shazana and Ning. Now, last Friday, the Kota Kinabalu High Court ruled in favor of Sabah, declaring that the federal government acted unlawfully by withholding 40% of the state's revenue from 1974 to 2021. The court invalidated the second and third review orders and issued a mandamus requiring Putrajaya to review the revenue allocation and reach a formal agreement with Sabah within 180 days.
This decision has sparked mixed reactions among political leaders, with some viewing it as long overdue correction and others warning of political tension between state and federal authorities. So what steps can Sabah and the federal government take to ensure the agreement is reached smoothly?
For more thoughts on this, we speak with Professor Dr. James Chin, Professor in Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania. James, good morning. Always good to have you on the show. Can we start off with the history of this case? Where did it begin? What is it about?
Yes, good morning. So the case stems from a thing called the Malaysia Agreement, MA63, in which Article 112D of the Federal Constitution says Sabah is entitled to 40% of net federal revenue collected from the state. So basically it says that all the taxes collected by the federal governments from Sabah, 40% of them are supposed to go back to Sabah. And the reason that this has happened is because at the time of independence, the Sabah government felt that, they really need money in order to develop Sabah. Sabah, as you know, was way, way behind Malaya at the time of independence back in the early 60s. Now, what happened was that the federal government negotiated with the Sabah government that since 1974, rather than give them the 40%, they gave them a thing called special grants. So basically from 74 onwards, the federal government has not paid any of this 40%, and the federal government's argument is that we provide a separate thing or special grant. So 3 years ago in 2022, the Sabah Law Society decided to file a judicial review, arguing that these special grants are actually not correct, that the federal government was in breach of the federal constitution. So basically last week on October the 17th, the Kota Kinabalu High Court ruled in the Sabah Law Society's favor, declaring that the federal approach using these special grants were actually unlawful. So the court case basically asked the federal government and the Sabah government to come together to work out the details, and they have 180 days to sort out how they're going to pay this 40%.
So how significant is this ruling? I mean, what does it mean for the state's autonomy and rights under the MA63 framework now?
Right. So it is really, really significant because this is the first case that is related directly to something that is in MA63, and the Sabah Law Society has filed a case. So now we have a precedent. It really affirms Sabah constitutional right to fiscal autonomy under MA63. More importantly, it has a political implications because under the current Malaysian rules, right, for high court cases, the federal government has 30 days to appeal. In other words, the federal government must appeal by the 17th of November. But the problem is that there's a Sabah election coming on the 29th of November. Nomination day is on the 15th of November. So everybody you speak to Sabah will tell you that if the federal government appeals against this result, it will have a major implication. In fact, it may decide the outcome of the Sabah state election on 29th of November.
Can you walk us through a little bit of what you see? How is this decision, reshaping voter sentiment for the Sabah state elections? Are we going to see any parties really get behind this decision? What's your sense of how they're reacting?
So every major political parties in Sabah are supportive of this decision. Obviously, everybody wants Sabah to get back the 40%. Sabah really needs the money to fix up its key infrastructure problem. So even all the governing ruling parties within Anwar's own government, people like UMNO, Sabah, GRS, all of them are telling the federal government not to appeal this decision. In fact, one of the parties in government called APCO, their minister, there's only two federal ministers in the Sabah, from Sabah and the federal government. Dr. Wong has actually told the federal cabinet that he will resign if the federal government appeals this decision. So it's really a highly emotive decision, and I would argue that if the federal government appeals this decision, it will have a major impact on the election results on 29th of November.
One curious element of this case, James, for me, is that this didn't come from the state government, right? This suit actually came from the Sabah Law Society.
Yes. So what happened was that the state government was involved earlier in one of the other lawsuits filed by some of the key Sabah ministers and politicians, but they withdrew the suit after Anwar basically told them, don't go through the suit, we can negotiate in the background. So they pulled the suit, and that's the reason why the Sabah Law Society decided to file the suit. One of the important things about this suit was that prior to this suit, many people thought that the only people with local standing in terms of filing against anything related to MS-63 were the state governments of Sarawak and Sabah. But now the courts has recognized that bodies like the Sabah Law Society do have the right to sue issues related to MS-63. So this is a major legal precedence, and this will allow other people to sue as well.
James, which then begs the question, even if the federal government doesn't appeal, negotiations are going to take place. What do you see happening behind the scenes?
So it's a bit too early to try to second guess what will happen. Obviously, the default thinking among the federal AG's office that they have to appeal this. But they know that because of the Sabah state election, there'll be political implications in terms of appealing. So many people are saying that one of the ways they want to get around this is probably they'll file the appeal, or they go back to the High Court and say that can we get a delay in terms of the appeal date. So they want to push everything to after the state election. But I think the people in Sabah are waiting for a signal from the federal government as to whether they're going to appeal or not. I think whatever the federal government does, it is widely seen as Sabah as a lose-lose proposition. If the federal government appeals, then all the governing parties aligned with the Anwar administration in Sabah will be in big trouble, because obviously this will become the top, the top campaign issue. If they don't appeal, then the Malayan political establishment will be very angry. Part of the reason they'll be very angry is that because they don't believe that Sabah and Sarawak should get any more autonomy, because this is all linked to the wider issue of state autonomy. And don't forget, there's a lawsuit coming out between Petros and Petronas. These are all linked together. But among the bureaucracy, I think the biggest problem they have is that if the federal government doesn't appeal, it means they have to go back, and do some real work in terms of calculating how much is the 40%, because they've been arguing about this formula for the 40% since 2018. So we're talking about something that's happened for many years already, and both the federal government and the Sabah government cannot agree on the formula.
James, thank you so much for helping us understand what the situation is. That was Dr. James Chin, Professor in Asian Studies at University of Tasmania, really laying out what's happening with this revenue case between Sabah and the federal government. So many things at stake with the state elections coming up.
Yeah, but the court ruling is significant because it's confirming that the 40% share is a constitutional obligation, not a political favor or financial discretion. I'm just at the back of my mind thinking, how much is it going to cost?
Stay tuned, BFM 89.9.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.